That's Debatable is sponsored by MB&G. MB&G is specialists in the esoteric world of vehicle and furniture warranty insurance, delivering quite marvellous customer service, prompt claims payment, and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, call Paul Smith, the Managing Director, on 07887 501 441. That's 07887 501 441. Hello and welcome to That's Debatable, the weekly news podcast of the Free Speech Union. And welcome back to all of our listeners and to our viewers. And Jan, I was just, before we quickly talk about your Saturday night and the event you had on Saturday, I was looking at some of the comments underneath last week's episode where we talked to Martin Speake and interviewed him. And one of the comments was just a very quiet comment, just said, "This chap's such a gentleman." And I think that really kind of got me in the same way it got you last week when you talked about how Martin really is one of the best jazz musicians there is. And to be taught by him is an honor and a privilege. And so you've got a gentleman who is at the top of his game. And this is what cancellation is. This is what we see across our casework. It's not some person that is not likable. It's not some person who's in any way extreme. It's just an ordinary person, in this case, an extraordinary person whose career is, boom, cut short. So it was a very small comment underneath the YouTube video, but it really kind of hit me. Yes, he's a gentleman. And that's exactly the sort of person that gets cancelled. So thank you to those who make those sorts of comments. We do read them. But you were travelling around on Saturday, Jan, weren't you?
Yes, I was up in Manchester meeting our Manchester members, which was great. I always love going there.
Yeah.
And we had this very interesting event about football and free speech. What the regulations of football and football fans and players indeed, what we can learn from that about the way in which free speech more generally is under threat. So we had a really great panel of Baroness Claire Fox, Lindsay Smith, our member and Newcastle United fan, who's been banned from attending games, the club that she's supported forever, because of tweets she's made online, nothing to do with any behaviour in the grounds, anything she's said to anybody in the grounds, purely on the basis of her political engagement on Twitter about the gender critical trans issue. And Toby was in the chair, but then we also had Joey Barton, who is a former footballer, manager, really knows the game inside out and is deeply passionate and ingrained in the game, and is a controversial figure. People kind of have very strong feelings about Joey Barton, largely without knowing very much about him at all. So we did have some reaction to putting him on the bill, but I suspected that he would actually be a brilliant addition to the panel, and indeed he was. So it was... as with all of our events, so many things come up. So although it was nominally about football, and we did talk about, obviously, Lindsay's case, and she told her story brilliantly about what it meant to her to have taken from her the thing that is the most integral aspect of her identity, which is being a Newcastle United fan from forever until she dies. And she still will be. She hasn't given up on that. But the club has given up on her. So the thing that was really brilliant was part of the fact she's a very, very good speaker, and I think surprised herself at how good she was. But also, somebody from the floor, asked her what it meant to her to be cancelled as a fan, and it really is. It's the same as the Martin Speake kind of story, which is the taking away of something that's the most integral part of you, and it was incredibly powerful the way she describes it, and she finds that's the most difficult thing to come to terms with, really. And afterwards, I was thinking, the problem is as well is that her fellow fans. So the reason she loves the club is because that's where her attachment lies, and it's also to do with fans, and it's to do with all the kind of social ties of the game, which came up in the discussion quite a lot about the significance of football as somewhere where really organic ties between people are forged and sustained. And as far as I know, Lindsay has not had grassroots support. And I know when her case hit the headlines, or our headlines anyway, last year, I remember thinking, oh God, the fans are going to be outraged by this. And I asked a friend who's a Newcastle fan to look on the fan forums and find out what was being said. You know,
Is that
tumbleweed.
fear, do you think, Jan, or is that just
Mm.
lack of understanding of what this really entails, or
I
is it?
think people always have a reason not to get stuck in.
Yeah,
There's a sort of, it's not necessarily, it's partly fear, but it's also because they believe the monstering. So the whole point of these cancellations is that so much mud is thrown at somebody that everybody else thinks, well, there must be some truth in it.
yeah.
So Lindsay must have kind of perpetrated hate, or Martin Speake must have some way of, in some shape or form, be racist, and Joey Barton must be whatever people need him to be kind of monstered. So I do think then people become, they can justify not acting and not voicing their support. And so I think we've got to get over that. And I really, that what came up in the meeting, which was really interesting from the floor, was people saying, for a long time I've not said anything, and now I've decided I'm going to, no matter what. Quite a few people said this from the floor, and I think quite often at our meetings, when you've got 100 people getting together, you find these themes coming through at different points in time. And the theme, I would say, from Saturday was very much, okay, after Southport, after the grooming gangs scandal has become something about which we can no longer be silent, albeit opened up by a gazillionaire from America, um, people saying we have a moral responsibility to speak, to say what we think. And I think that's incredibly powerful. One chap from the floor said, how are we supposed to navigate this and keep a job?
Mm.
You
Mm.
know, and he said, where does society go morally from this juncture? It's almost civilizational. And I've just been back to the video and kind of got his quote, because I thought that was so interesting, that people really do feel that there's a moment here that if we don't now start to speak our minds, then the moment will pass, where if you don't speak your mind honestly when the most hideous things have happened to children, then there is nothing else that's going to provoke you to speak your mind. So anyway, that was really fascinating. And I think people found the conversation just very free. So there was a mixed audience of TERFs, women campaigning around women's sports, women there to support Lindsay, women there who get out there and are activists in Manchester and around that area on all those related issues. But then also lots of other people who are very concerned about other issues, and bring them together and having a free conversation
Powerful
is
stuff. Well, it's always
yeah.
the challenge of understanding our times and understanding the moment. What is the narrative of the moment? Because we know the backdrop of cancellation, we know how that works, we know the DNA of the cancellation. But then how is that linked to society in the current conversation more broadly? And what you're
Mm,
saying is
mm,
that we may be at a moment where people are saying thus far and no further,
mhm,
in new ways, or maybe we're just moving out to the next layer of people as they become aware of how egregious this is and how far-reaching this is. So I think that's a
mm.
really interesting observation. Now that video will be up, won't it, Jan? The video of that night will be going up at some point onto our YouTube channel, as per
Yeah,
normal.
probably later this week. I mean, what we do with our events is we always make them available to members.
Yeah.
So behind the members paywall on our site, all event videos will go up there, unless there's some disaster. It doesn't get recorded, or somebody's been hideously
Other than
libelous.
technical reasons, they'll be
Yeah,
there.
technical or legal.
Yes.
But even then, we'll probably just trim out some aspects. Um,
Yeah.
but then sometimes we choose to make them available to everybody on YouTube. So this one I haven't quite decided yet. I think it would be a good thing to put on YouTube, but we want to make sure that members have perks, strong perks to being a member, which is you get access to exclusive events and exclusive content. So we'll decide later in the week. But no matter what, members will find out in the newsletter on Friday.
We want to talk as well about this victory, another victory that we've had this week, which is to do with the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. We have expended quite a lot of ink responding to not just one, but two consultations in 2023 and then again last year in 2024. And what we were responding to was this new requirement that was at risk of coming into the actuaries code that would have required members to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion, these EDI acronym with which we're all very fundamentally bored, I think, now. But the very good news is that the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries has now scrapped that requirement. Now, there are some other things that we didn't get scrapped, such as there is going to be a requirement for members to respect everybody. And we argued, well, actually, there are some people in society who are not always deserving of respect. However, the most important thing was that we didn't think it was right in the Actuaries Code to have a requirement for members to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion. Of course, this is their code of conduct. And the thing with professional codes of conduct, they don't just apply in the office. They don't just apply when you're acting for a client. They apply everywhere in your personal life, obviously on social media, but throughout. And you can go through a complaints process and it can be grueling and you go through the ringer because of it. So why is it a free speech issue? Well, because equity isn't actually about equality of opportunity, which we all believe in. It's about engineering equal outcomes between identity groups. And for all sorts of reasons, that's what's leading to cancellation, because if you're not in the right group saying the right thing about other groups, you are in danger of being cancelled. And the proposal was also pretty vague and left lots of open doors in terms of mission creep around these definitions. I mean, the E is a really good example. It used to be equality, it's turned into equity, and now what would it be next? We just don't know. So it's great news. Now, Jan, was looking at some of the comments actually on LinkedIn, but underneath us announcing this victory, as we are prone to do and should do, and quite a few of the comments said things along the lines of, "Oh, that's great, but what about this group? What about this profession? What about the surveyors or another group?" Which I think is a really valid question. Why was it? Why are we banging the drum on this one and not on others? And I think there's three answers to that question. The first is, really it comes down to where and when we can actually open up these policies and have an opportunity to strike them out or knock them down. And the first opportunity is when there is a consultation, when there is a public consultation. So in this case, the Actuaries and the Bar Standards Board actually did this as well for their code of conduct just a month or so ago. They open up their proposal for feedback from professionals, but also from groups more broadly who may have where there's a public interest, who may want to submit a response to a consultation. Now, that is the most natural moment at which we can come in as the Free Speech Union and write a response to the consultation. And what we'll also do is often work with professionals, in this case, some actuaries, and say, look, here are some model answers. You put your answers in as well. So there's more weight behind what we're doing. So that's the first and perhaps the easiest. The second is where it's a particularly egregious code that we are notified of, and that a member comes to us and says, have you seen this? And we've had that happen a few times. There was some training that was put on by the Bank of England just before the election, some transgender training, and we managed to find details of what that training course was, and we were able to sort of expose that, write a letter and say, look, have you seen this training? It really is very worrying and will infringe on the free speech rights of your employees if they have gender critical views. And so that's another opportunity, so second opportunity where there's a particularly egregious code then we're able to respond to that. The third is also a way of attacking EDI, where it infringes on free speech, but not as good, because it essentially means we go into bat for someone who has been cancelled. So someone trips over the tripwire, they come to us and say, "I've lost my job, I've been disciplined, I've been suspended, whatever it is. Can you help?" And a good example we spoke about recently, Jan, is that of Eleanor Francis, who was effectively forced out of, or could no longer work in the environment that was being created. And there were two departments there. She was a civil servant, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. So we were able to support our member and challenge that very specific set of circumstances through the employment tribunal, whatever it may be in different cases. And that's how we do that. But of course, that has the huge disadvantage of involving someone being put through the ringer. So those are sort of the three ways in which we push back against these. But by far the best is when an organization opens up their books and says, "Here's a code that we're thinking about. Please give us some feedback," because we can give the feedback. And so that's why this is such a great win. It shows it's worth doing.
And to what extent, how easy would it be to transfer your consultation response to other professions then, do you think?
Oh, that's the great question. It's never as easy as it should be, because every consultation has a sort of a slight different operational spin. Sometimes it's a portal, just practically speaking, sometimes it's a portal, sometimes it's a Word document, sometimes it's something else. So you have to adapt everything and you have to kind of work out what questions they're going to ask on the portal. And sometimes they just they're not exactly the same questions, but they're sufficiently different that you have to rewrite quite a lot. But the essence of it, which comes down often to gold plating of the Equality Act and this sort of activated, politicized view on so many issues, that essentially means that there is a throwing away of any understanding of the tension between different groups that are protected by the Equality Act. That essence never changes, and that tends to be the line of attack. Definitions is often the line of attack. So in short, yes, once you've done one consultation, you're pretty much 90%, maybe not that much, 80% of the way on another consultation. But there's always a wrinkle. And unfortunately, that wrinkle tends to take more time than it should to answer. And that's actually where we really value the input of members who are very aware of their area of expertise. So if they're accountants, they'll be able to say, well, actually, we have to deal with this situation or that situation. If they're surveyors, or if they're speech therapists, or if they're whatever, you get a real sense of how it applies in that specific situation. And that's hugely valuable, because then we can
Yes.
really tailor the response.
But it also really helps, doesn't it? Because to go from one profession to another, because people can say, well, look, the actuaries have done this, and they're all respectable professionals, and yet they've rejected it. So this isn't a given. Whereas I think each profession, when the professional body, I know when the Bar Standards Boards were considering introducing DEI, and we had a really good panel event about it, which included one of the kind of people who was responsible for implementing that consultation in the first place. You could see what tends to happen is that within the profession, they don't even think there's any questions to be raised, really, other than how do we go even further. So I think to equip people to say, well, hang on a minute, this isn't a given that this is a good thing. And actually, there's some very serious professional consequences and ramifications of this that, as professionals, we need to take very seriously. And it allows people to raise these questions in the most respectable, professional way, and to hold the profession to its own standards. And so I think that's all very encouraging. It's great that you did that work on the consultation.
Yeah, it paid
And there's
off. It's
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah. No, it's a brilliant thing. And I would also recommend people look up the Scene networks, SEEN. If you Google that, Scene networks, they are throughout covering an awful lot of professions now. They do focus on the sex equality issue, but and how that is cropping up in different professions. But it could be in media, publishing, uh, government, all kinds of different areas. It's great. So I mean, you think about a few years ago when we set up, it was only really the academics that were starting to kind of defend academic freedom. And since then, lots of professions are starting to see the free speech consequences of new codes. So this is, I think
So
it's really, really
it is
important.
also an opportunity to say thank you to the actuaries. There were more actuaries than I imagined. It's my old profession, so it's particularly close to my heart. But thank you to those actuaries who are out there, that you know who you are. You really helped. And there is a very specific way in which the professions in the trenches help. They really get how a profession is governed. And often it's not a simple straight line from the member up to one governing body. There's often a sort of day-to-day governing body who are brought in, who are not actuaries or not that profession, and then there's a governing council who are but aren't doing it 24/7. That's not their day job. And so you suddenly realize it's useful to understand how every professional body is governed, so that your voice and your objection has greatest impact. And they also, very practical things, like they know exactly who has the most influence in the organization. And so you effectively, all of the tactics that are applied by the activists, or have been applied by the activists over many decades, we're relearning them for ourselves now, and saying, well, actually, we need to know which levers to pull in the organizations to make a difference. Um, so there's that as well. But thank you to everyone who helped us do that. It's very, very good news. And we should move on now to talk about the Home Office. So this is a report. This has been all over the news this last week, which is the report that was written for the Home Office. It had a very special name. It's called a Rapid Analytical Sprint, and it was actually a report that was ordered by Home Secretary Yvette Cooper last August after the Southport riots. And all over the news it's been, and it concluded that tackling terrorism should be based not on specific ideologies, such as Islamism, but on a whole range of behaviors and activity of concern, from spreading misinformation to anarchism, from an interest in gore to environmental protest. And so you can see this net getting wider and wider. Now, there is good news here, in that most of the recommendations from this report, it appears, were knocked down by ministers, and they said, no, we're not doing this. We're not going as far as you're suggesting. You're sweeping up far too many things into this sort of extremism definition. And it raised a lot of questions about exactly what's influencing the Home Office, actually, which is the whole part of this discussion. But the bit from a free expression perspective that was most worrying is to do with NCHIs. And this is the bad news, is that the Home Secretary does still seem minded to increase the recording of NCHRs, especially in regard to Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And we've talked about this on so many occasions. But one thing Toby said in his monthly newsletter that's just gone out is that if there is an intention to, in particular, scrap the code of conduct that Suella Braverman brought in last year, if there is an attempt to do that, we as the Free Speech Union will take legal action. So we're very clear that this is absolutely at the heart of free expression. But it was one of the bits of bad news that came out of this last week.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just really emphasizes the importance of achieving clarity on these issues. And when you look at the report and the policy exchange report about the report, um, it's this kind of muddle. It's almost like an unwillingness to try to achieve clarity. It's like it's almost easier to fudge everything rather than actually cut through, and in a way that would require you to upset a few people, to make distinctions that are hard. And it obviously is, it's not straightforward. So the Axel Ritter Cabana case, it isn't straightforward at all. That, you know, what the terrorist influences were, if any, on him. Obviously, he's got the same access that everybody else has got to, beheading videos, Al Qaeda manuals. That was obviously part of his makeup, in the sense of his trajectory towards what he eventually did in Southport. And it's not straightforward, but we do need to be able to sort of weigh up different influences, and the difference between one thing making a young man incredibly bitter and antisocial, and another that will drive him, or allow him to drive himself towards the most brutal, unspeakable acts, and to somehow achieve a state of callous indifference about that. So I was thinking about what Islamic terrorism does and has done. Primarily, I think it's like it elevates terrorism to a thing in itself. It's almost like terror is the ideology. So, and it breaks taboos all the time. So, although we've had terrorism in the past and we've had mass killings, we had the Dunblane massacre by one man, which has never been repeated. It wasn't like a pattern of any kind when Thomas Hamilton shot lots and lots of children in Dunblane. This one, with Axel de Cabana, there are things that are very similar to terror attack, straightforward terror attacks. So, killing children and targeting innocent people. This is what happened at the Manchester Arena bombing. Throat cutting and stabbing. That's something that has happened by lone wolf operators in the name of Islam, and in kind of mass events as well. Beheading. Lee Rigby was beheaded on the streets of London. Driving vehicles into crowds. These kinds of tactics whereby there's no purpose to them. There's no political purpose other than causing terror. And I've been reading a book by the philosopher Hannah Arendt called The Origins of Totalitarianism. I was reading it on the train over the weekend, and she talks about totalitarian movements. So rather than understanding totalitarianism as just the imposition of the state on the population, what she's talking about, because she's trying to understand the 1930s and the developments that led to both Stalinism and Nazism, is that totalitarian movements actually scoop the masses into them. It's not just a question of the state gaining more and more control. So when people look at Keir Starmer and talk about him as being, Keir Stalin and all of this kind of stuff, that's not the same kind of move. What you need is this other thing, which is that people become indifferent to cruelty. And I think that what we see in the downplaying of people's instinctive responses to Islamist terror is this kind of attempt all the time to almost cultivate indifference. So at the end of my weekend in Manchester, it was only when I was getting on the train, I thought, this is the place where 22 people were killed at a pop concert. This is the place when 7 of them were children. And yet you wouldn't know it. You're in a city and you wouldn't know it. Nobody refers to it. It's extraordinary. Over 1,000 people injured at that, and that wasn't very long ago. It was only in 2017.
It's a very
And
powerful
so,
idea, cultivation of indifference, Jan,
yes,
as an end goal.
yes, because when you break a taboo, it's not just that you and impose your willingness to embrace terror on people. It's not just the terror and people's fear. It's the fact that people kind of become inured to it and don't know how to respond. So I think, you can see that lots of people are talking about this now, about how there's this kind of cultivated response of downplaying people's what should be their instinctive reactions all the time. And I think in Southport it was very interesting, because I think there was an instinctive reaction. And I was talking to people in Manchester who, obviously, it's not very far from Southport. We were in Liverpool the week before, not very far from Southport. And people's instinctive reactions are the right ones. They're absolutely horrified and they want something to be done and they want to know what went on. And similarly with the grooming gangs, rape gangs that everybody's talking about at the moment, beyond, I suspect, polite society, where people are still kind of clearing their throats about it and sort of dismissing people's concerns as hard right, far right adjacent, all of this kind of nonsense. Normal people understand that we should be horrified by the stories of the the rape gangs, and that it's something that people's natural reactions were suppressed for a really long time, and we kind of almost undid our own instincts. So I think, and the only way in which we can cultivate those kind of moral instincts again is to speak about it. And that when you suppress stories, or when you kind of encourage people to look the other way, you end up with confusion, with ignorance, and ultimately with resentment. And I think, again, in the Southport, in the riots, when they turned, definitely turned physical, and people were turning their anger against, people who were in asylum hostels, and very dangerous situations, and not something you want to see happening. That's the point where resentment becomes sort of uncontrollable, if you like. And in a democratic society, we have to be able to openly discuss these kinds of things without fear that somehow we're going to make it worse. And what can be worse? What can
Well,
be
I mean,
worse
this
than the murder of
cultivation of
children?
indifference is one thing, but also this then pushing the line of what you are allowed to say, or not allowed to say, and even being able to talk about things, and the taking away of the right to speak about any of this is at the heart of it. And just going back to this policy exchange report, which I thought was, we'll put a link to it. It's written by Andrew Gilligan and Dr. Paul Stott, and it was called Extremely Confused, which I thought was rather a clever title. But in that report, as well as this point about reversing the limiting of the recording of non-crime hate incidents, in recommendation 15, the report says that ministers should consider whether to introduce a new criminal offence of making harmful communications, for instance, on social media. It says that such an offence was originally included in the Online Safety Bill, now Act, as we know, under the previous government, but was removed as some stakeholders and parliamentarians were concerned about the impact on freedom of speech and the potential to criminalise speech on the basis that it caused someone offence. The proposal was for a new offence based on likely psychological harm. And again, we have our head in our hands when we hear that, because we realize that not only are we being encouraged to be indifferent to these absolutely outrageous acts, but we're also being told we cannot speak about them, and that if we do go online and talk about them, then we're at risk of having the bobbies knocking on the door, or at risk of losing our job, or at risk of any number of things happening to us. And so it's this sort of two-pronged attack, to make most of us indifferent and to make the rest of us fearful, and self-censor. And it's working. It's working.
Yeah, and you separate off the people who have the strong reactions. They're the ones you demonize. So you demonize Lindsay Smith for her reaction to, women's spaces being invaded by men.
Yeah.
You kind of Joey Barton. I mean, Joey Barton has had the police at his door over a tweet, in which he made a joke about female football commentators of the type that any bloke might hear or say in a pub after a match. I mean, it's just it's unbelievable, and what it does though is continually kind of monster as Joey referred to himself as a dissident. It monsters the dissident, and that's a kind of we've got to resist the monstering, and say, I'll make my own mind up. Thank you very much. I will meet this person. I will hear them speak. And then I will make my own mind up about them. And the thing at the moment as well is that most of us have views that are, could be considered sort of mainstream about things, and are mainstream reactions. And then amongst those views are also these kind of wackier end of things, and all of us have got them because we're all trying to make sense of the world, and we don't really have the old frameworks in which to do it. People used to, if you're in the left, you generally were anti-capitalist, and you kind of thought you understood how capitalism worked, and the problem with it was this, and this is how it needs to be changed. And similarly, if you were on the right, you would think the market worked, and then you would be kind of, you had these kind of frameworks, and people didn't really think you were mad for thinking those things. Whereas now, people are still trying to come up with those meta theories of how the world works, but of course they're clutching at straws sometimes, and And so it does verge into conspiratorial thinking sometimes, I think. But amongst that are all these very sensible reactions to things, and people can be dismissed for the conspiratorial end of what they think, but actually we need to listen all the time to the sensible reactions and people's kind of instincts coming through, and that we have to make politicians listen to those, because otherwise it's just going to carry on getting worse and worse if they just carry on ignoring people.
Talking about who is sat in places of influence and who is sat in places of potential power, although the House
You're
of
working
Lords
hard
isn't
on that
quite as
segue, aren't you,
powerful as it
Tom?
used to be. Do you like my segue there, Jan?
That was a bit torturous.
A little bit tortuous, I'll admit. You got me. Toby is now Lord Toby. So Toby Young has now been elevated or ennobled, I think, is the word. So last Tuesday, the 28th of January, alongside the Free Speech Union's chairman, Lord Biggar, both of them were ennobled last Tuesday. And the following day, Toby was appointed vice chair of the all-party parliamentary group, APPG, on free speech, which is dedicated to defending civil liberties. And as you would imagine from that title, the APPG brings together MPs and peers, so both houses, from across the political spectrum to champion freedom of expression and push back against whatever legislation is going through the houses that could threaten to curtail our free speech. And one very in the moment thing that's going on is there is a petition up to abolish NCHIs. It's an FSU supported petition to abolish NCHIs, non-crime hate instance. And we're around about, as of the time the monthly newsletter went out, 23,000 signatures, which is a testament to the strength of public support for that petition. But if we get to 100,000 signatures, it will be considered for debate in Parliament, of course, where Toby can now weigh into that. And so that is great news. Already there are issues and moments that are coming up right now where Toby, in his new role, can weigh into debate and make a difference. So we are pretty excited actually about that, and immensely grateful to the support of all of our members, 25,000 members plus supporters, really, who have made the FSU what it is, which is then, I mean, we don't know, but I think that's a huge part of why and how both Toby and Nigel have got to where they got to last week. So it really is a win. I think it's a win for all of us who love freedom, and
Yes.
especially for those of us in the Free Speech Union.
Yes. Well, there was the staff, amongst others, the FSU staff were invited to celebrate with Toby and Nigel at the House of Lords, which was a really special event to be part of. And Toby made a very lovely speech, and he thanked all of the staff and of the FSU and the members, because it's basically undone his cancellation. And going back to what I said earlier about the monstering of people, Toby was roundly monstered a number of years ago, and that's what prompted him to set up the Free Speech Union. And that monstering has been undone. There'll still be people who don't like him or respect him, but there's a huge number of people who are either enthusiastically respectful of Toby and what he's achieved, and then others who were reluctantly respectful, but nevertheless can it's undeniable what has been achieved. And I think there's an awful lot of our members who feel there's been some kind of collective contribution to this, and the positioning of Toby and Nigel Biggar in the Lords is a kind of vindication, not just personal but collective, of the importance of free speech. So it's very good news, and it that legislative wing of what we do. So we do our casework. We kind of try and build a community through events, etc. We do the consultation work, the kind of working on the guidance and the nitty gritty that you did with the Actuaries work. And then this legislative work, which I think is obviously really, really important as well. So, it's great. And I think a lot of people can kind of see a little free speech cabal emerging in the Lords, which nowadays the Lords is much more accessible to people's public view. So I know with Claire Fox, who's already in there, Baroness Fox, she puts out videos of when she speaks in the chamber, and that it informs people. It's an incredibly useful thing to open up the processes of debate. So that's really good. And I wanted to plug an event that we've got happening in under 2 weeks' time in London, and we're calling it the Big Bill of Rights debate. It's a debate about whether in Britain, if we had the similar constitutional protections for free speech that the First Amendment permits in America, would free speech be in a stronger position? And our provocation with Professor James Allen is that it wouldn't. So that's going to be really interesting. And his responding to him, who takes the opposite view, is Preston Byrne, who's I think an American entrepreneur who's coming over especially to take part in that debate. So that's in London on the Wednesday, the 12th of February. We don't often do head-to-head debates, and I think this will be a really, really good one for people to come to. Members who can't get to London can join online free of charge. Just look for the link in the weekly newsletters. That should be really good. And then another quick events plug goes back to what we were talking about with Quran burning, etc. Is we've got an event that I've just released on the website on apostasy, which is obviously those people who leave religions, in particular religions that are very high control. We've got an event on why it is that those people, those individuals, really, really need strong free speech protections. So we're doing that in conjunction with a kind of offshoot or a service offered by Humanist UK called Faith to Faithless, which supports people from all kinds of high control religions, whether they're former Muslims, former ultra-Orthodox Jews, former Jehovah's Witnesses, people who've been raised in Scientology, former evangelical Christians. So all people who might end up ostracized and experiencing threats of some kind when they leave a faith, and that those people need to be really strongly protected to speak the truth about what's gone on, what's happened to them. So that event should be really, really good, and that's on our website as well, and we'll be talking about that in coming weeks in emails, etc.
A big week for free speech, at which point I think, Jan, we should probably call it a week and wish all of our listeners and all of our viewers a very happy week to come, and we'll speak to you next week.
Bye-bye.